In 1942, Albert Speer became Germany's Minister of Armaments and immediately recognized a problem that would help lose the war. Germany was building weapons that were impressive but took too long to produce, while its enemies were building simpler weapons in overwhelming numbers. German engineers had designed technically superior tanks, aircraft, and weapons systems that required precision manufacturing and scarce materials. Meanwhile, Soviet factories were producing 3 tanks in the time it took Germany to build one. Speer's industrial advisors warned that Germany needed to abandon prestige projects and focus on mass production of simpler. Germany entered World War II with a fundamental disadvantage that no amount of technical skill could overcome. The combined industrial capacity of its enemies, Britain, the Soviet Union, and eventually the United States, exceeded German production potential by factors of 5 to 10 to 1. This was not a temporary gap that could be closed. It was geographical and demographic reality. Germany had fewer workers, less raw materials, and smaller industrial infrastructure than its enemies combined. The only way Germany could compete militarily was through either ending the war quickly before enemy production reached full capacity, or by maximizing production efficiency to narrow the numerical gap. This meant building weapons that were simple to manufacture, used common materials, and could be produced in large numbers by semi-skilled workers. Germany's military situation required mass production above all else. Nazi ideology created a fundamental contradiction with Germany's industrial reality. The regime was built on claims of the decision to prioritize advanced weapons. Not everyone in German leadership accepted the priority on prestige projects. Fritz Todt, the original armaments minister, had warned that Germany needed rationalized mass production. Industrial economists calculated that simplified designs could triple output. Military logisticians reported that complex weapons broke down more frequently and required specialized parts that field maintenance could not provide. Some Wehrmacht officers argued that having 3 adequate tanks was better than 1 superior tank. These warnings were professional and documented. They came from people who understood industrial production and military logistics. They were dismissed. Hitler and the Nazi leadership interpreted concerns about production efficiency as defeatism or lack of faith in German technical superiority. The institutional culture made it impossible to argue that simpler was better without seeming to doubt the premise of German superiority itself. The pattern of choosing prestige over production appeared in Germany's first major weapons decisions. The Bismarck-class battleships were technical marvels that consumed resources equivalent to thousands of tanks but achieved little strategic impact. The early Panzer designs were over-engineered for what they needed to do. German aircraft were designed for performance rather than production efficiency. Each decision made sense individually. Better weapons should perform better in combat. But cumulatively, these choices meant that Germany was building. The Tiger tank represented everything wrong with Germany's production priorities. It was brilliantly designed, nearly impenetrable armor, powerful gun, intimidating presence. It was also a manufacturing nightmare. Each Tiger required twice the production time of a Panzer IV. It used exotic materials in short supply. It needed precision parts that broke down under field conditions. Most critically, Germany could build 1 Tiger in the time Soviet factories produced 3 T-34s. Professional military logisticians argued for building more Panzer IVs instead, a proven, reliable tank that could be mass-produced. Hitler and the designers rejected this approach. The Tiger represented German technical superiority. The decision was made not on industrial grounds but on ideological ones. Germany would build impressive tanks that won individual battles but lost the production war that determined overall outcomes. When Germany recognized it needed a new medium tank to counter Soviet T-34s, the institutional bias toward complexity repeated. The Panther was designed to be superior to everything: better armor, better gun, better performance than any Allied tank. It succeeded technically. It was also By 1943, Germany's strategic situation was desperate, but Hitler's response was to double down on prestige projects. He authorized development of Vergeltungswaffen, vengeance weapons, that would supposedly turn the war through technological breakthrough. The V-1 flying bomb and V-2 rocket consumed enormous resources and achieved minimal strategic impact. The V-2 program alone used resources that could have produced thousands of fighter aircraft desperately needed to defend German cities. Engineers and scientists who could have improved production efficiency were instead developing experimental weapons. The professional military leadership understood these projects were strategic waste, but they could not say so. Hitler had declared that wonder weapons would change the war, and questioning them meant questioning his judgment. Ideology and prestige had completely overwhelmed practical military necessity. By 1944, the consequences of Germany's production choices were mathematically clear. Germany had produced approximately 25,000 tanks during the war. The Soviet Union had produced over 100,000. Germany built roughly 100,000 aircraft. The Allies produced over 600,000. German submarines were technically sophisticated but produced in insufficient numbers to affect Allied shipping decisively. German weapons performed well individually but were overwhelmed by numerical superiority. The production gap was not caused by inferior German manufacturing capability. German factories were efficient when they built practical designs. The gap was caused by design decisions that prioritized complexity over quantity. Every hour of engineering time spent improving tank armor was an hour not spent simplifying production. Every resource used for experimental weapons was unavailable for proven systems. The cumulative effect was catastrophic. Albert Speer spent 1943 and 1944 trying to rationalize German production. He pushed for standardized designs, simplified manufacturing, and focus on proven weapons. He achieved some success. German production increased significantly under his management despite Allied bombing. But he faced constant resistance from Hitler and Nazi ideologues who insisted that new wonder weapons would change the war. Every proposal to cancel prestige projects and focus on mass production was politically dangerous. The institutional culture that valued technical innovation over production efficiency could not be changed quickly. By the time Speer achieved limited production reforms, Germany faced enemies with overwhelming numerical superiority that no amount of improved efficiency could overcome. The decisions made in 1940–42 about production priorities had created a gap that could not be closed in 1944–45. The production gap's consequences were visible on every front. German units destroyed enemy tanks at favorable ratios but could not replace their own losses. Luftwaffe pilots flew superior aircraft but were outnumbered 5 or 10 to 1. German submarines sank Allied shipping, but Allied shipyards built replacements faster than Germans could sink them. The Wehrmacht fought with tactical excellence using weapons that performed well individually. But tactical excellence could not overcome strategic mathematics. Armies that cannot replace losses eventually lose regardless of how well they fight. By 1945, veteran German formations were being destroyed not because they fought poorly but because they faced enemies who could absorb and replace losses while Germany could not. The decision to prioritize impressive weapons over adequate numbers meant that Germany's best combat units were systematically outnumbered into defeat. Even as defeat became certain, Nazi ideology prevented acknowledging that production priorities had been wrong. Hitler continued approving development of advanced weapons like the Me-262 jet fighter and new tank designs while existing systems could not be built in sufficient numbers. He insisted that technical breakthroughs would compensate for numerical disadvantage. The possibility that Germany should have built simpler weapons in larger quantities could not be officially acknowledged because it contradicted the premise of German technical superiority. Professional military officers and industrial managers understood the error, but the political system made honest discussion impossible. By 1945, German factories were producing small numbers of increasingly advanced weapons while Allied factories produced overwhelming quantities of adequate equipment. The pattern that had started in 1940 continued unchanged until final defeat. The contrast with Allied production philosophy demonstrated what different priorities could have achieved. American Sherman tanks were not technically superior to German tanks individually. But American factories produced them in numbers that overwhelmed German forces. Soviet T-34s were simpler than German tanks but could be produced by semi-skilled workers in factories beyond German bomber range. British aircraft were designed for production efficiency as much as performance. Allied weapons were adequate rather than exceptional, but adequacy in overwhelming numbers proved decisively superior to excellence in limited quantities. The philosophical difference was clear: Allied planners designed weapons that could be mass-produced. German planners designed weapons that demonstrated technical superiority. Both approaches had their logic, but Germany's strategic situation required the approach it did not take. Military historians analyzing German production decisions identify a pattern that appears repeatedly in history. When ideology shapes resource allocation, practical necessity gets subordinated to political imperatives. Germany had the industrial capacity and technical expertise to compete more effectively with Allied production. What it lacked was leadership willing to prioritize quantity over quality when strategic situation demanded it. The decision to build impressive weapons rather than adequate numbers was not forced by circumstances. It was a choice driven by ideological commitment to German technical superiority. Professional advisors who recommended focusing on mass production were overruled by leaders who believed that quality would overcome quantity. The result was that Germany fought the entire war outnumbered on every front by enemies who understood that adequate weapons in large numbers defeat superior weapons in small numbers. The lesson extends beyond World War II. Strategic success requires matching resource allocation to actual requirements rather than to ideological preferences. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the production decisions made throughout the war had created a final force ratio that made defeat mathematically certain. German forces were outnumbered approximately 5-1 in tanks, 10-1 in aircraft, and similarly in most other equipment categories. These gaps were not created by inferior German manufacturing. German factories produced high-quality weapons efficiently when they built practical designs. The gaps were created by design and priority decisions that consistently chose technical sophistication over production quantity. Every German Tiger tank was superior to Allied equivalents individually, but Allied forces had numerical superiority that overwhelmed technical advantages. The Wehrmacht fought its final battles with weapons that performed excellently but existed in numbers too small to affect outcomes. Germany's choice to prioritize prestige projects and technical superiority over mass production had created a strategic disadvantage that tactical excellence could not overcome. The decision was not made by industrial planners or military logisticians. It was made by political leadership that valued ideological demonstration of superiority more than practical military necessity.